I have a puppy who is going a little nuts over here. But so if I'm a little distracted, that's why. But she should do better than she did a few weeks ago when I filmed my TBR. I did not mean to wait so long before filming my August wrap-up. I'm in my 3rd year of BookTube now, and I have never filmed a wrap-up after the month. I've never filmed my August wrap-up in September until now. It is what it is. We gotta get started on this wrap up. And I have so many pictures from August that I think my intro slideshow of the wrap up of the month is probably going to be quite long. Okay. Where do I want to start? Let's start with, I do have my teacup with teacup questions. But I have a small stack of nonfiction, so let's go ahead and go through that first. So I have The Wisdom of the Beguines, and I'm really glad that I read this. This was very readable, it's very short, and it is the history and the life story of some of the major players in the establishment of this lay order, a religious order. I didn't realize it was religious. So if you saw the TBR video in which I talked about this, I had seen a YouTube documentary because I was looking at videos of Belgium and I was, wanderlusting or whatever. Like I wanted to go traveling, but I couldn't. So I was looking at videos of Belgium and they talked about the Beguines, and they gave the impression that they were a non-religious, a completely secular group of women who decided to live and work together. But that is not the case. And they were also not focused only in Belgium and France, but also all over the world. But they are lay women, meaning they are not officiates of a religious order. They did a lot of good. And they still exist today in some areas, but they were really powerful women who created an avenue of existence that didn't exist for them because the options that were available to them didn't work for them. And so they went, you know what, let's do this our own way. Let's do our own thing. And they did, and it was awesome. Very interesting slice of history and worldview that I was not super aware of or even aware of really at all until I read about them, and I'm so glad that I did. So a little bit random, but also super interesting. I read How to Raise the Perfect Dog, and it is not helping me at all. I love Cesar Millan. I am no Cesar Millan. He's very much like he's a dog psychologist, and he's very much about pack order, which I think is correct and extremely wonderful, and doesn't work at all with my beagle puppy. Not one thing in there has worked with my beagle puppy. Not one. I read Unfollow, which was amazing. This is a memoir of loving and leaving extremism by Megan Phelps Roper. And this is her memoir of growing up in the Westboro Baptist Church and the complicated relationships that she has had her whole life with people outside of that church and her family in that church. She's actually the granddaughter of the founder of the church. And it's such an interesting juxtaposition of this super loving family with these unyielding personal beliefs. Everything is so black and white to them, and they just, they completely cut off anything that is not in full agreement with them. And part of their manifestation of their faith is through hate speech, which they consider love speech. Because they speak against what they believe to be anti-Christ or anti-God. And so they believe that in speaking in a hateful way, they are showing the greatest love because they are pointing out the flaw that will eternally damn someone. So she felt like, even though she was propounding hate and surrounded by hate, and acting hatefully and speaking hatefully, that she was in a very loving community as she was growing up. But then she starts to see contradictions within their belief system and within the way they, the expectations differ between men and women, even though that goes against what's preached. And she starts to see family members that don't believe be cut off from the family, never to be heard from again unless they decide to come back and fully embrace their way of life. I won't tell you some of the wild things that happen in this book, but there are some definite things that just make your heart break that happen in this book. It is so well written. It is so engaging. I did what I love to do with a memoir. I listened to it read by the author as I read along. There was plenty to underline and mark and to journal about and to think about. And I highly recommend it. That's Unfollow by Megan Phelps Roper. This graphic novel, Glass Town, which The Imaginary World of the Brontes by Isabel Greenberg, which I have placed in my nonfiction section, even though it is a little bit fictionalized, because this is basically a biography, a creative biography, or a biography of the creativity of the Bronte children. So this includes Branwell, because it's talking about the era in which they received the tin soldiers, which were the impetus for the creation of their two worlds, and as children, and all of the writing that they did as children, leading to many of the characters that you see in their adult novels, especially Emily and Charlotte. And it's very well done, and the art is beautiful, and if you don't know anything about the Brontes, you can dive right into it. If you don't want to read the Brontes, you still might enjoy this. If you love the Brontes, I definitely recommend it. And then there is Lola Out Loud. So my puppy's name is Lola. I couldn't resist picking this up, but when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a great book, and I'm gonna use it in my classroom. So this is the story of Lola Huerta. It says her grandpa calls her, I do not speak Spanish, so please forgive me, but her grandpa calls her Lolita Siete Lingua, Little Lola Seven Tongues. Maybe that's siete. Lolita Siete Linguas, Little Lola Seven Tongues, all fighting to be heard. Lola is trying not to make so much noise, but when she witnesses injustices in her own neighborhood, she knows she can't keep quiet. Can she find a way to use her voice for change? Inspired by the real-life civil rights activist and labor leader Dolores Huerta, Lola Out Loud reminds us that even our biggest heroes started out small. So this is actually a fictionalized story of something that might have happened in her childhood, but it is in line with her philosophy of life. And it's such a well-written, beautiful book with gorgeous art and an uplifting tale. And one of the lines that is repeated, one of the repetitions, is, when you see a problem, fix it. Don't pretend it isn't there. When you see a problem, fix it. Don't pretend it isn't there. There's a lot there to build on in any direction that feels comfortable for you as a parent or a teacher, while also sharing a true story about a real woman who used her life and her influence, whatever influence she had, to try and improve the lives of others. I loved it. I really loved it. All right, so now we have a good stack of fiction. I'm gonna do some manga first. I started Spy X Family, and this is so fun. It is so fun. It had me laughing out loud from the very beginning because part of the premise has to do with a toupee. Even now, it just cracks me up. But basically, this is about, if you don't know, this is about a man who is a spy who is told that for his next mission, he's told that for his next mission, he's going to have a wife and a child. So he goes they don't provide him with anyone, which is weird, but he goes and he goes to an orphanage and he gets this child. He doesn't understand, or he doesn't realize that the girl that he picks is clairvoyant or can read minds. And so she's telepathic. That's what she is. She's telepathic, not clairvoyant. She's telepathic. So she can read his mind, but she's also a little girl. She has very little impulse control, and sometimes it weirds him out what she says, what she does, what she knows. And then he meets this woman who he asks to have a marriage of convenience with, basically, because in order for his new daughter to get into this great school, he has to have a wife, and he just happens to ask a woman who is also a hit woman, like she kills people for money, but he doesn't know that. She doesn't know he's a spy. She doesn't know that her new stepdaughter is able to read minds, and adventures ensue from there. It's hilarious, and it's super fun, and it's very fast-paced. I really enjoyed it. I also read The Ancient Magus Bride, which I did not enjoy as much. This is darker and stranger, and addresses ideas of human trafficking and of entity trafficking, and also of arranged marriage or forced marriage, and also slavery. But it doesn't, I mean, it's all in a world that doesn't exist. I don't know. It was weird. It made me uncomfortable. The book made me feel uncomfortable. So I'm probably not going to continue on with this series. Then I read Dreamin Sun by the same artist and author as, by the same artist and author, sorry, I keep having to look down at the dog, by the same artist and author as Orange. And I've read Orange and I really enjoyed Orange, and I just thought this was so-so. This feels very much like a very old school Korean drama, like Boys Over Flowers, that sort of a thing. You've got this girl, she's decided to run away, and conveniently she just happens to run into a group of boys, well, one boy who's part of a group of boys who are a little bit older than her. Some of them are in class with her, and they all rent a home together, and they're like, you can rent a room with us, and hijinks and love triangles ensue. I probably won't continue with this, but if I see the next volume sitting at the library or something, I probably would be interested to pick it up. If I want this kind of story, though, I am just going to watch a K-drama from like the 1990s, 2000s. Palace Princess Hours, those sorts of things, if you're familiar with them. That is what that book feels like. And then, the joy of my manga journey. I read the first 2 volumes in Hat Atelier, and I cannot tell you how much I love this. I have 2 volumes sitting on the shelf waiting to be read for September. I've pre-ordered the one that's coming out in September. I do need to pick up the numbers 4 through 9, I think, or 8, 4 through 8, which are already out, so I need to pick up a couple more volumes. But I want to read and own this entire thing. It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous. It is just, I mean, the art in this is so beautiful. So this is the color beginning of it, which doesn't continue throughout. But then you get some of these detailed panels, and you also get, let me find an example, this kind of drawing. The story itself is just so engrossing. It is about a young girl who lives in a time and a place where witches are born, not made. You can't decide to learn to be a witch. You can only become a witch if that's what you're supposed to be, if that's what you are. Except that when she's very young, at a village market or a fair or a festival or something, someone in a strange hat that kind of covered their face sold her a book and a pen, and she hasn't ever known what to do with it or how to use it, but this is how magic is done in this world. The magic system involves the drawing of like runes, like certain symbols, etc. And what she has been given is a spell book with all sorts of terrible things in it, and she doesn't know. And then a situation happens which pushes her outside of her comfort zone and into a place where she, although not born a witch, must become a witch. And so she's doing the thing that her society says is not even possible, doesn't exist, isn't a thing, she's doing it. And she faces adversity, and she faces hatred and jealousy, and I think there will also be some love in there, but right now it's really just about her finding her feet and kind of trying to learn a fire hose full of information on the go with life or death stakes happening around her. And it's so fast paced, and it's so feel good, and it's so fun. Yeah, I love it. And I also just found out that they are going to be making a anime of it, which is super fun. And I will also mention, even though I didn't read it, I started watching the Neverland. I don't know if that's what it's called. Finding Neverland. Is it called Finding Neverland? The one about the kids in the orphanage. I started watching that on Hulu here in the States. And I think I'll continue to watch it as an anime as opposed to read it as a manga. But it's so good, people. It's so good, and it's perfect for spooky season. If you are at all curious about anime and manga, I think that's a great place to start. Although it is very dark. If you aren't into darkness, I say start with Hat Atelier. There's dark in there, but it's very manageable. It's very manageable. And it's addressed well. I'm not going to answer teacup questions about the anime that I read. I'm sorry, not anime, manga, about the manga that I read, but that is the manga that I read, and I'm super excited to continue with Spy X Family and Hat Atelier. Let's go through the teacup questions for the fiction. So first, let's go with Bean's Big Book Bash pick, which was Raj, which I realize now I never made videos for. I'm sorry. July and August were really great and really, really terrible months, and I lost all sense of everything. So I'm probably not going to make videos for this book, or maybe even the rest of Bean's Big Book Bash. I don't know. I am continuing to read Bean's Big Book Bash picks, and I will continue to tell you about them. For example, this month it's the Brontes, and maybe when I turn this off, maybe when I'm done with this video, I might just make a quick Bronte Bean's Big Book Bash video. I don't know, but yeah, I will make what I can make, and that will have to be good enough. But anyway, let's talk about Raj by Geeta Mehta. Let's pull a question. So the question is, what do you think the author's goal was in writing this book? What ideas were they trying to illustrate, and what message were they trying to send? This is the story of Jaya. Jaya is born into a very traditional kind of Rajasthani male-dominated kingdom. And it is, by traditional, I don't just mean patriarchal, I mean like very old school traditional. And she's been raised to marry into an arranged marriage, and it's going to be a marriage that perpetuates the political systems and relationships as well as the financial relationships between two kingdoms within India at the time. But before that can happen, World War I happens, and that kind of throws tradition and culture into great upheaval, which also throws her entire life and reason for existing into upheaval. She is in a place and a family where they're very anti-British rule. They want to rule themselves. And this is during the British Raj when it starts. So the Raj is ruling, Britain is ruling India. India is a colony, and they are very much opposed to this. But she ends up, after World War I, or right during World War I, being married into a very Anglophile kingdom, a kingdom that is very much in partnership with the British. Even though they are Indian, even though her husband is an Indian, they are pro-British involvement. And so she has grown up all her 20 some odd years anti, and now she has to embrace to figure out who she's supposed to be, where her loyalties are supposed to lie, who she can trust and who she can't. how things work. And then partition happens. The Quit India campaign, and Gandhi is there, and she is married to a person who does not want the British to leave India, yet she also admires and follows the teachings of Gandhi. And then Pakistan and India split. I don't know if you're very familiar with that history, but they have a civil war. It's very bloody, it's very rough and awful, and families are split apart. Ancestral land ownership is just like cut in pieces. This arbitrary border goes up, bloody upheaval that creates an actual physical rift in the nation. And the British pull out. And all of this affects her. And she's been raised to think that her purpose is one thing, but she has to learn again and again and again that maybe purpose is situational. Yeah, it's an interesting book. I never quite forgot that I was reading. I never got deeply invested, although the story is one that is just so fascinating. And the concept of telling India's history through this one woman, Jaya, is so fascinating and so well envisioned. It's not executed well enough to make me forget that I'm reading. As I was reading, I was always very much aware that, oh, this is what she's doing. This is what the author's doing. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to take away from this. So there was something lost. So what is the author trying to do? She's trying to tell the story of India through the character of this woman. She's also trying to talk about womanhood in India and how very difficult it is to be a woman, no matter what the cultural situation is like. Briefly, A Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. Nell Stevens is the author of two of my favorite nonfiction memoir type books. And so when I found that she was writing a fiction, I was so excited. Let's see, I'm gonna pull a teacup question. This says, which character or moment prompted the strongest emotional reaction for you? Why? There's a lot here. So the narrator of this is a ghost. She's been in this kind of like a monastery for a very long time. She died young. I won't tell you the circumstances because it's part of her story. But she died young, and she's been in the same place for a very long time, watching people come and go, and realizing things about herself. She's very much a sentient being. She's been watching people come and go, and realizing things about herself and her family and her history. She can watch her family who lives in the village, etc. And she's lonely, but also she starts to realize things over the centuries of her existence, that she can find ways to experience sensations by using the humans who are around her. She falls in love with people, all sorts of things. Like, she lives a very full life for a ghost. But then one day, the author George Sand and the pianist Chopin and Sand's two children arrive. And Chopin is very sick, and the kids are a little bit unruly and out of control. So it's also simultaneously a biography, kind of the relationship between Sand and everyone around her. The ghost can go into memories, can also see the future, which she tries not to do, but can't quite keep herself from doing at one point in this book. And that is what got the strongest emotional reaction from me. The ghost's story, which there's a point, but I don't want to tell you because I don't want to ruin it, but there's something that happens in the ghost story which elicits an extremely emotional response from me. But also when she starts to look into the future of George Sand is also a really emotional moment. And this is just so well written. It's so well written, and it's so beautiful, and it's full of a lot of truth, but also things that might make you feel uncomfortable. So definitely look into it before you decide to pick it up, but I suggest it. I think it's a really wonderful book. That's Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. I read The Restoration of Celia Fairchild by Maria Bostwick, and this was just such a fun ride, also full of a lot of truth. This is the story of a woman who is an advice columnist, and she gets let go. She gets replaced. She costs too much money. And so they pay her a year's salary and say, sorry, we're going to hire somebody else to use your false name and continue to give advice under the name you've been using, but it won't be you giving advice because we can hire somebody younger and cheaper than you. And so she takes that year's salary and she fixes up a house that she also conveniently happens to inherit from her aunt. And all sorts of things come to the surface as she tries to restore this house in a very short amount of time, because she is also in the process of trying to adopt a child. She's been chosen by a young pregnant teen, or maybe she's not a teenager, but very young woman who is about to give birth to be this child's mother. And there's a lot of things that have to fall into place, and losing her job is not one of them. So she's got to scramble. And so it's a lot of like what happens when a person's under pressure. But it's about found family, and it's about community, and it's about dreams, and it's about goals, and it's just a really, really lovely story. It's got a tiny bit of romance, but what this really is the story of this woman and her dealing with her past, her present, and embracing her future. I highly recommend it. I think it's a really good feel-good story, and it's definitely one that I will want to reread in the future. There was a lot in there to really kind of ruminate over and just let settle. It's also very well written. I want to read something else by Maria Bostwick. Marie Bostwick. This is the first thing that I've ever read by her, and I just thought it was so excellent. I read The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side by Agatha Christie. This, I think, is my least favorite Agatha Christie that I've read thus far. It's about a socialite. Marina Gregg is this movie idol, and there is this cocktail party, and things happen at this cocktail party. It felt a little flat to me. This one was written in the 60s. It might be the first one she wrote in the 60s. And I feel that, 1962. So this one's from 1962. And I feel that the closer into the 60s that we get with these Miss Marple books, the less Miss Marple feels like Miss Marple. Miss Marple feels to me very much like a character planted in the ideals and the norms of the 40s and the 50s. And seeing her in the 60s just feels like wrong. All that thinking for the word wrong. It just feels contrived, I guess. I don't know. I didn't like it. I feel like there's something there that I'm missing, some kind of bitterness. And I don't know if she meant to write it just for the character or if it's something that's exuding from herself and it's coming out in her writing, but it just didn't feel the same. It felt not bitter. It felt jaded. The story felt jaded. It felt like, well, obviously this is what's going to happen, and obviously this is how people are. There was no discovery. There was little curiosity. It was a lot more of point and tell. And I just didn't enjoy it. Like I have enjoyed the previous ones. She really comes into her own in the 30s and the 40s and, the 40s and the 50s, and that is where I imagine her and where I want her to live. Yeah, just felt very different, very different. I read Hazel Gaynor's When We Were Young and Brave. I really enjoyed this. I really, really enjoyed this. It is harsh at times. It's about a group of girls. It's based on a true story. Very fictionalized, I'm sure, but it's based on a true story. In the true story, it's a group of American Girl Scouts who are going to school in China at a boarding school when Japan, during World War II, occupies. That's the word I'm looking for. When Japan invades and occupies. But in the book, it is girl guides, British girl guides. They are attending the school there for lots of different reasons, but it seems that China is so far away from the European theater of war that the families decide to leave them there, thinking that China is the safest place for their children during this time of war. However, then Japan invades and the girls are prisoners of war, basically, and how these two teachers kind of hold it together for them and keep them safe. It has some of the same strains of storyline as something like The Power of One, as well as A Town Like Alice. So if you're familiar with some of the happenings in those books, historical happenings in those books, some of the things that you read in here will feel familiar. But what this is really doing is focusing in on two characters. The story is told in revolving chapters that flip-flop between the voice of one of the teachers and the voice of one of the girls. And so you get both perspectives. And some really horrendous things happen, so check trigger warnings. But also, it's such an ultimately uplifting book that it feels like a victory in the end. And it also feels very real. It feels very, very real. I just sneezed. I loved every moment with this book, and I highly recommend it. This is When We Were Young and Brave by Hazel Gaynor. I will definitely be looking for more Hazel Gaynor. This is historical fiction at its best, in my opinion. Loved it. Loved it. I read the history. Oh, I didn't answer a question. Goodness gracious. So let's do When We Were Young by Hazel Gaynor. The question is, what motivates the actions of each character in the book, sorry. And that would be survival. Whether they're Japanese characters or whether they are British characters or whether they are Chinese characters, they are all motivated by survival. And that is not only physical survival, but also the survival of the soul and the survival of the emotional, mental well-being of humans. The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. This was my reread. It was my second time reading this. I loved it the second time I have read it. It has been over a decade since I read it the first time, and it's so great. So the question for The History of Love is, if this book were made into a movie, who would play each of the lead characters? I have to pick a different question because that's way too hard for this. There are too many characters. Maybe I'll just do the main character. Oh, there's too many main characters. I'm gonna focus on, all right. Let's try to finish this up fast. Okay. I'm gonna focus on the girl who is named Alma. So when I envision her, and I'm gonna have to put a picture of her up here and write her name because I don't remember her name, but the little girl who's in so many movies from like the 1940s, who always plays this kind of weird, precocious, but odd girl. She was in Meet Me in St. Louis. I'm gonna have to put a picture of her up here. But that's who I imagine is Alma. Maybe a young, like Addams Family era Christina Ricci as well. And I don't know why I envision her in that way. She's not like that. I don't know. She's not like creepy or bizarre or anything. I don't know, but that's who I imagine. I also read this novelization, which I'm not going to answer a question for, of a manga. This is If It's For My Daughter, I'd Even Defeat a Demon Lord. And you could see when I say novelization, it is literally a novelization with some images. Got the wrong thing, basically. I meant to get the manga, but I got this because I liked this cover a lot better. I liked this art style a lot better, and I thought it was also a manga when I ordered it. I was wrong, it's a novelization, and it felt very much like, you know how when you'd go to the Scholastic Book Fair as a kid and you would get like The Karate Kid, and it's just the novelization of the script of the movie? So it doesn't feel, it's not written for beauty and character development and all of that. It's just telling you the plot. That's what this is like. And so it was fun to get to know what that story would be. I don't think it's a story that I will continue reading, but basically it's about this guy who finds a demon child and the chaos that ensues after that. I read Hondo and Fabian, which is a book that I will be using in my classroom. It is about the bestest day that Hondo has and the bestest day that Fabian has, and they're two completely different bestest days. I read Above the Timberline, which is basically an adult picture book, which took me a whole lot longer because there's a lot of very tiny writing in it. It took me a whole lot longer than I thought it would. But it was fascinating and interesting. It is a dystopian, futuristic, like post-apocalyptic setting, our world kind of. But a person's father has gone missing in the Arctic and they are trying to find this father, and there's some scary things that happen, espionage type things that happen, and like the reveal of who the father really was, etc., etc. It's all in here, and it's told very much through both the images, which are gorgeous, and the story, but also journal entries and like phone logs and like all sorts, or communication logs and all sorts of different ways of communicating, but really you're trying to solve this mystery of what happened to the father, who is the father, what's the father involved in, and also what's really going on. It's well done. I would recommend it. It's a very unique reading experience. I have not read anything like that before, like in that kind of format before. I think it would make a really great gift. I think it would make a great Christmas gift for someone. I recommend it. I don't really know how to rate it or how to answer a question about it though, because it's different. It's very different. So I'm going to move on to That Way Madness Lies, Shakespeare's most notable works reimagined. So some of the authors that are present in here are Lindsay Smith, Kirsten White, who's another one I recognize, Dahlia Adler. Yeah, so they just each took a story, and the stories are situated by whether or not they're romance or comedy or tragedy. Comedy and tragedy, I don't think they're by romance, but whether they're comedies or tragedies. And they retell the story in kind of a different setting with different characters, but the same overarching story. This is not a new concept with Shakespeare. I must learn that I don't really love short story collections. I just don't. And I need to stop forcing myself to read them. I didn't rate it. There were a handful of stories that I truly did, enjoy is a very strong word, that I thought were not a waste of my time. And then most of the stories I felt fell flat or were too fast or didn't actually get what I get out of that play. I just need to not read short story collections, I think. Two more. I'm not going to answer a question. I didn't rate it. I didn't think it was fair. Two more, last two. I read this chunker, The Cathedral, by Ben Hopkins. And this is actually extremely readable. Once you start reading it, it goes very quickly. The words are not super small or anything. That's part of it. But also the writing is excellent. It is incredibly engaging. It draws you in. And it is basically a very long history of the building of this cathedral, told through the relationships, the cause and effect relationships that happen over the course of time. How the cathedral is the center of it all, and kind of the impetus of a lot of things that happen. Well, actually the impetus of a lot of things that happen, but it's really focusing on the relationships between all of these interrelated people. It's not easy to describe. How is it described on the back? Let's see. For almost 2 centuries, the construction of a grand cathedral in the center of the medieval town of Hagenberg unites a vast array of unforgettable characters whose destinies are inseparable from the shifting political factions and economic interests vying for supremacy in the region. Immersive, highly entertaining, at once an erudite work of historical fiction and a gripping tale of intrigue, Cathedral tells a sweeping story about obsession, mysticism, art, money, and earthly desire. Yeah, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. Cause and effect, relationships, all revolving around this cathedral. It's so well done and so great. Let's see if I can answer a question. It's a huge, huge tale. Let's see what the question is. Oh, yeah, I can answer this. Was this book satisfying to read? Why or why not? I would say yes. I would also say I read it too quickly. It is the kind of, I read it physically, but I also listened to a lot of it. I physically read a lot of it, but I also listened to a lot of it on my commute. And I think it's the kind of book that you really need to be able to give your all to. It needs to be your only book. It requires that from you. It requires that it be your only book and that you read it sitting down to fully get it. It's not a difficult book. I'm not saying that. It's just that it's so nuanced at times. It really rewards the reader with Easter eggs, I guess is a good way to say it. And I think that I missed a lot of things until like way after. But if I were really sitting down and reading it slowly and really savoring it, I think it would be an extremely satisfying read. As it was still a satisfying read. I did enjoy it, and I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it and how quickly I was able to read it. But I'd like to go back to it in the future and give it the one-on-one attention that I think it requires and deserves. Last book before my dog tears down this entire apartment. So here we go. The Authenticity Project. This is another one that I listened to. I think I only physically read to page 38. And after that, so the rest of it I listened to on audio on my commute. And in small bits and pieces here as I was setting up my classroom, etc. And it's the kind of book that you can do that with. It is about, basic premise, a man writes his authentic self, his authentic story into a journal. It's like a 2-page journal entry. It's not super huge. And he writes it down. And he then leaves it in this shop, this cafe owned by Monica, who is another person in our story. He leaves it in her cafe to be found. And with it is a challenge to be the next person to add to this journal your own authentic story. And so it's basically this, how this journal brings some people together who need some found family and some community. But also, what is she chewing on? The pillow. She is again chewing on the pillow. I've taken this pillow away from her like 4 times during the filming of this. I'm just gonna hurry. So this is basically a book about found family and about finding yourself. And it is very feel good and very well done. And for what it is, I would say that it feels a little bit flat. It feels a little bit contrived. But also there are true moments of like insight and beauty, and I loved the ending. That is what I loved. So let's answer a question before my dog tears up that pillow. If you could talk to the author, what burning question would you want to ask? Well, Claire Pooley is our author. Oh, and by the way, I do think that I would reread this. Ooh, I just realized it was blurbed by Sophie Kinsella, who is one of my very favorite contemporary authors. A clever, uplifting book that entertains and makes you think. I agree, Sophie Kinsella. Claire Pooley, I want to know, would you write your authentic self into a journal and leave it someplace? Is that something you would do? Because that's a question I asked myself as I read this whole book, thinking, would I do that? If I found the journal, would I read the journal? And if I did read the journal and I realized what it was for, would I add to it? I don't know. Would you? If you found the journal, would you read the journal? That's the first question. And if you did and you knew what it was for, would you add to it your own true story? Like, and it doesn't have to be like dark, but like all the things that you think are imperfect. Big questions. Small book, big questions. Okay, I have to go rescue this pillow from that little tail wagging beast right there. Lola, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you attacking that pillow? Yes, she is. I have to go save that pillow and maybe take her on a WALK because she has a lot of energy today. Some days she wakes up and she's a tranquil sea. And some days she wakes up and she is a typhoon. And today's a typhoon day. So I'm gonna do that so that hopefully I can sit down and edit this video and get it out today. I would love to get it out today. August was a rough month. I still managed to read some, but as you can tell, not as much as usual. Definitely fewer pages than usual. I am, let's see, do you see that stack of books back there by those pictures? That's my September TBR. I am working on it. I started the month off strong by finishing a book yesterday. It was The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig, which was so good. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to answer coughing, a teacup question about it. But that's for September. So I will see you soon. I don't know about my scheduling for recording and things, but I know that for the time being, I'm probably just going to be doing TBRs and wrap up videos. When I can fit something else in, I will. Some months will be easier than others because I will have days off, and some months I will not. Yeah, she's gotten very quiet and still, but you can see she's still, her little head is bobbing. I need to save the pillow. So I'm gonna go. And after I take her for WALK, I am going to edit this video and then I'm gonna read. So hey, let's go read. Bye.